morning, everyone. This is Glenn Hodges, founder of Chattanooga Self-Improvement Meetup, a mastermind group designed to help each person to become a better person. Self-Improvement Meetup Mastermind is a place where we learn, we listen, and we share so that we can help make this world a better place in which to live. I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker today, my friend Mike Rabinowitz. Mike is a former New York City police officer, an experienced speaker and trainer. Mike, while serving as a police officer, communicated with community leaders in addition to inspiring high school students to start their life on the right track. He discovered the important connection between communication skills and law enforcement, in addition to building a relationship with the community he was protecting. Mike used his experience and expertise as a police officer to launch a second career in customer service and training call center personnel in communications and leadership. He now strives to help companies through training, speaking, to prepare their employees to become better at connecting with coworkers, customers, and management. Mike taps into his childhood upbringing in Brooklyn, New York, his experience as a New York City police officer, in addition to stories of his three brothers and fathers who were also police officers, to teach communication skills to inspire people to communicate to success. Mike believes it's time to take responsibility and get real about creating effective relationships. Using his street corner approach, Mike will help you realize that it's your self-awareness and accountability that will help you to be a more effective communicator. Thank you, Mike. We're so glad to have you with us today, and I'll tell everyone up front, the mastermind will begin right after Mike concludes, and he will have to duck out about 9:20 this morning. So we'll continue the mastermind after he leaves. Thank you, Mike. It's all yours, buddy.
Well, thank you. And the first thing I'm going to do is the number one rule of virtual is to lower my phone. So, which during training classes I tell everyone to do. So I just heard a bong, so that reminded me. So it is fantastic to be here. Just the subject of this mastermind about self-improvement ties directly into my wheelhouse, which is communication skills. And I know that when I hear that, and I've heard that in my career, I always looked at communication skills as a generic term. It's just people throw it around a lot. I always find it on a resume. I always have people during interviews, when I've interviewed people, that they feel they're very good communicators. And every time I've heard that, the question always entered my head. And what I did is I started asking. And when somebody says you're a good communicator, I would say, well, what does that exactly mean? You know, and usually people fumble through the answer about, well, what does it mean to be a good communicator? Do you like to talk to people? Do you have that gift of gab, as we say in New York? And how does it help you succeed in your life? So again, as people fumble through that answer, I would then ask them, how do you know? How do you know you're a good communicator? Because when you think about communication skills and people, their image of you, who's the real judge of whether you have good communication skills? It's probably not you. It's probably the people you're communicating with. They're the ones who have that sort of image of you in determining whether you're a good communicator, whether they feel easy talking to you, whether they want to talk to you, whether you're looked at as credible, reliable, truthful. So we have to become more self-aware, because people's perceptions of us are based on what we show them. So when we're communicating with people, what do they see and what do they hear? And I think individually it's hard for us to know, because we don't carry around a big mirror with us so we can see what we look like, what our body language is saying, what our facial expressions that we're making. We don't know. We think we know, but I've learned through my research that we are not familiar with what we display. And that's when mixed messages start to happen in communication, is because we think we're putting out a message based on our intention, but what the person's seeing is something a little bit different. And that creates misunderstandings and lack of communication. So that's kind of my theme. That's kind of my angle that I take when I talk about communication skills. So a little bit background about me. So as Glenn mentioned, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And my upbringing was, very close-knit, because I lived in a type of neighborhood where everybody knew everybody's business. I lived on what they called in Brooklyn a block, not a street, but you lived on a block. And that block maybe had about 200 families on it, living, next door to each other, all connected homes. And, there was a lot of diversity. And my friends growing up were from all walks of life, all cultures, all different experiences. Some of us lived with our parents and our grandparents. Some of us, grandparents lived in another town or another city. Some of us, were raised by our grandparents, and it was just that diversity. And then we played in the streets and we played sports, and, we would draw the football yard lines in the middle of the street with spray paint. And we played football in a, 30-foot wide street. Try to figure out how can you play football on a 30-foot wide street, but we did. So the communication part, I think, was just natural to me growing up, because in order to have friends, you had to communicate with different personality types. So I think that gave me my start. As I look back now, and an ongoing theme I'll have during today is I wish I knew then what I know now, because I think that would have helped me out of some sticky communication skill situations. So that I think gave me a head start. And then as I got older, and as Glenn mentioned, I'm from a family of cops. So my dad was a cop. So now I'm the child of a cop growing up, and, tried to hear some of the stories that my father would come home and tell us based on our age, and seeing what the life of a police officer was from my mother's point of view. And, all the different adventures my dad had, as I looked at it back then, were adventures. And then, as we were getting older, it was apparent that his 4 sons were going to become police officers as well. So now we're put into that world. So now I take the communication skills that I might have learned in my childhood. How do I apply them to the streets of New York? And then during training in the police academy, yes, there was some communication skills training. Not as involved as it should have been now that I look back. Again, I wish I knew then what I know now. But they did teach us about communicating with different types of folks in different types of situations, because now you're adding another ingredient to the recipe, right? So you have personality types, and you want to communicate with them as best as possible. But now they're in different situations. And from a police officer point of view, it's probably 90% of the time not a pleasant situation that you're encountering the police. So that is something that they taught us, right? So every time we drive up to a scene, we were taught to know that, look, they're having a bad day. They have some reason that they have to call 911. And we had to take that into consideration when we're encountering people that, look, they're not going to be on their best behavior. They're not inviting us over for coffee. They need help, or they need intervention, or they need something from the police. So we had to learn to know that as we came upon the scene, we had to account for that. We had to know that the person may not greet us with open arms, but our job was to protect, and our job was to resolve problems. So we had to learn how to get into situations that had to be calmed down. There was a lot of emotional intervention that we had to make. And now, like today, they call it emotional intelligence, but back then it was called social science, right? How to come upon a scene, and in situations that may be volatile. And as a police officer, we couldn't let the people we were encountering sort of, what they called in the police academy was hook our child, which was, hit our nerves. So then we want to fight back, because of human beings. If somebody gets in your face and points and says, you're this and you're that, naturally we're going to react. But as a police officer, it may not be in the best interest to do that at a scene or at a crime scene or even at a family dispute, which was quite common. So, what type of communication skills are required when you enter a scene where it's already at this emotional level, right? And you have to sort of learn how to tap into that emotional. So it's like any communication. When you want to build rapport with somebody, and in a social situation, it's a lot different than when you come upon a scene where things are happening and people are victims of crimes, or half the time they don't even want us there. And again, this is back in the 90s, right? Which, is a lot different than it is today, and everything that's in the media now. It's different because it's from a different perspective now. Now, the public is definitely more educated on what police do or don't do. Hopefully, they're more educated on the process that we have when we come upon a scene and what has to happen. We have to make sure everybody's safe. Then we have to get all the facts, and then we have to make sure that the right thing is done to get everybody calm. There's a lot of scrutiny today, and I'm not here to talk about that as far as what's happening today, although I have a lot of feelings about it. But it's the communication skill part of it that taught me a lot from my 12 years as a police officer. And again, when I look back at what I had to go through, I wish I knew then what I know now. So that brings me up to when I retired early. I did sustain an injury in my shoulder, forced me to retire. So now what do I do? Okay. One of my hobbies was computers, right? And I figured I would utilize that, and I did. And I went to a trade school, and I became one of those computer IT geeks, right? And I eventually got a job when I moved from Brooklyn to Charlotte, North Carolina. I got a job in a call center in Bank of America, which has its headquarters here in Charlotte. So now I'm dealing with a different kind of communication skill, okay? Because when you're communicating on the phone with someone, all you have is the voice. What you don't have is the facial expressions. What you don't have is the body language. What you don't have is the reactions to those two things I just mentioned. Now you have to talk to somebody, and it's just the voice. And now it's a different kind of help people wanting. I looked at it similar to being a cop in a way, which is crazy. But the idea is people are calling because they need help, right? So this call center was for the employees of the bank. It was internal. And every time somebody who's working at the bank had trouble with their computer and their productivity comes to a halt, and I'm sure everyone here in the room has been through that, where you have a problem with the computer and you got to get the IT person on the phone to help you, right? So now, how does that communication work, right? And here was my epiphany when I was on that job as far as communication. So you get complaints from customers after the call, and they would complain about the call center agent, that they weren't cooperative and they didn't do a good job. And of course, as the manager, which eventually became the manager of the call center, I had to investigate. And one of the things I would do is I was interview the call center person and say, well, hey, the customer said this happened, and that you said this, and that they said this. And, you get people that go, well, that never happened. I treated that customer great. So one of the training methods that we used was let the agents hear their own calls and listen to it. And then you'll know exactly what happened. And when I started doing that, it was an eye-opening experience for most people. When they hear, number one, hearing their own voice was something that they never experienced before. And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes about why that happens when you hear your own voice on a recording. And they started to, and I've had a few people that started to cry because they would say things like, wow, I didn't know I sounded like that. I didn't know I sounded that sarcastic. I didn't know I used my terminology. And that was the light bulb in my head. And I said to myself, you know what? These folks are not aware of how they sound. They're not aware of how they are talking to the customers. How can you be effective when you're not aware of how you sound? And I started to think to myself, wow, and part of the training was, it eventually became part of the ongoing training was hearing your calls, once a week or once every 2 weeks and listen to the different calls that you've made. And some of them were positive in how well you helped the customers. And then I started to think to myself, well, what about face-to-face communication? Are we as unaware of what we look like and what we sound like when we communicate with folks as the call center folks didn't know the way they sounded? And I was like, how can people communicate well when they're not self-aware of how they sound and then become accountable? So back to the call center, and the customer said, you sounded very sarcastic. And they go, I did not. And they heard the call and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize that my voice, that wasn't my intention, but that's the way it came out. And because that's the way it came out, that was the perception of the customer, that you were being sarcastic, you didn't care about my problem, and that created that miscommunication. So once I realized that, I started to do some research. I started to do research on the effects of the perception of people during communication, right? It's not about what message you think you're putting out there. It's more, how has that been received? And the perception of the person receiving the messages, does it match my intention? And that, to me, is where the major disconnect is in miscommunications. It's just that whatever was intended to be put out there is not being perceived that way because we're not aware of how we're delivering it. Does that make sense? Right? Because, we don't have a mirror in front of us and we're not hearing our own voice. We think we are, but we're not. So again, I started to do some research and then I started to break it down. And I started to think about, well, how do we communicate? What is it? What is the tools that we use? What's the core? What's the nucleus of communication? And I'll recommend a book to you, and it's called Silent Messages. And it's by Dr. Albert Mehrabian. And what the book is about is Dr. Mehrabian talks about how the speaking part of communication is just a small percentage of how you deliver your messages. The other parts are called silent messages, right? And they're included is the visual part, okay, which is what people see your body language, your hand gestures, the way you stand, the way you walk, and your facial expressions. All that 24/7 are sending out messages to people before you even say a word. People get something from you based on your movements. So that's the visual part. And we know what that is. That's your body language, your eyebrows, your nose, your eyes, your mouth, your head movement, your hand gestures, right? I can say, hey, come on into my office. I'd love to talk to you. Or I could say, come into my office. I want to talk to you. Two very different gestures, right? This one is kind of like, well, you're in trouble and you're coming to the principal's office. But this is like, hey, come on over. I want to speak to you. That's an example of how a hand gesture can be miscommunicated. If you do this when everything's great, the person's going to have a fear that something's wrong, right? Because of the hand gesture. Your eyes, your eyebrows, they raise. You have that look of surprise, or you have that look of, I'm not sure, even though you haven't said anything. You're delivering those messages to the person that you're talking to. Your appearance is a body language. Now, it's not about what you're wearing. It's not a fashion statement. It's not what hairstyle you have. It is, do you look like you care about the way you look? That's sending a message out. So whatever your hairstyle is it well-groomed? Or does it look like you just got out of bed? The clothes you're wearing, is it appropriate to the industry you're in? Just like when I was a police officer, that was my uniform. And when people saw me, I'm already speaking to them without having to say a word. Why? Because I'm wearing a police uniform and I represent something. Or any industry that has a uniform. People see that and you're already sending out a message. Think of when we were little and we used to see the ice cream man come down the street. I know in Brooklyn that used to happen. And our ice cream man wore this all white uniform with this cool looking hat. And that was the good humor man. And they sent out a message of happiness because every time we saw him, it's like, hey, come on, I'm going to give you ice cream. Didn't have to say that. So your appearance has a lot to do with it, right? Are your clothes clean? All right. What about your personal hygiene? Are you practicing personal hygiene? And when people get close to you, they'll be able to know, right? Is that sending out a message? Are you putting out a professional look when you're not dressed properly for your industry and you don't practice proper hygiene? And that person tries to start a conversation with you. Are you distracted? Are you listening to them, or are you thinking about, wow, they're not really dressed appropriately, or wow, they don't smell good, and it's not about smelling good. I'm not going to wear perfume and cologne, but when I'm communicating with people, just don't smell, right? I know that sounds silly, but when somebody gets close to you and there's no smell, well, that's good. They're never going to think that you're not practicing proper hygiene, and that's going to affect their perception of you. It's harder to communicate with someone when their perception is already different than what you've intended. And it's based on, some of it is based on your appearance, how you walk, how you stand. You can stand with a Superman pose. You can stand with a crossed arms pose. You can stand with a relaxed pose. You can stand with a pose that looks like you don't have a lot of self-confidence. And that body language is putting out those signals. And people already have that perception of you without even communicating yet. And that creates not an even playing field, right? Because people already have this thought of how you are, how you're going to be, what you might be, and it may be different than the messages that you're putting out there. And that's just the first V of the 3 V's of Dr. Moravian. That's visual, right? Next is the vocal, right? And actually, before I get to the vocal, facial expressions is another part of body language. Because we have so many muscles in our face, we have the ability to make probably 25, 35, almost 50 different faces. And again, it's based on your eyes, your nose, your eyebrows, your forehead. And if you ever look in the mirror and tried to make faces when you were a kid, you can make lots of different faces. And those faces that you're making during communication, they better match your intention of whatever the message is you're putting out there. Otherwise, people will be confused. Have you ever been talking to somebody and, they'll come up to you and they'll go, "Are you all right? Are you okay?" And you go, "Yeah, why?" It's like, "Oh, you were making this face. I thought there was something wrong." Or you say you like this, but your face doesn't. Your face says you don't like it. What's up with that? And because the face doesn't match the message you're trying to put out there. So that creates miscommunications. So again, face is part of your body language. And there's one particular face that really is influential. And that face is called the resting face. Now give me a thumbs up if all of you have heard of that phrase. Have you ever heard of the resting face, right? Okay, so Jennifer, you're saying no, never heard of it. Okay. And then without getting myself in trouble, but the female gender has put the B word in there, right? Have you ever heard of the resting bee face? And bee being the female dog. I don't want to say it. So that's another phrase. So Jennifer, let me explain what a resting face is. So, and it's really down to science. So when you are relaxed, okay, you might be somewhere and you're just relaxed. You're feeling, you found your Zen, you're just like relaxed and you may be sitting there. What happens to the muscles in your body is they relax as well. Because of gravity, when you relax the muscles in your face, what direction do they go? Anybody know? Down. Right. So now think about your face and what would happen if all the muscles in your face just went down. What would that look like? Attractive? Yeah, I don't know if any of you have ever seen your resting face, and here's a way you can see it and practice, because that resting face says I'm either mad, I'm angry, I'm pensive, I don't want to talk to you. If I'm walking past your cubicle and you're just chilling, you're not doing anything wrong. Maybe you're reading, you're looking at a screen, but you got that resting face on. When I look in your office, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to go in there. Something's wrong. Or I might come in there and go, "You okay?" And the person will go, "Yeah, why?" Because I don't know, you had this face like something, like you're angry. It's like, no, I'm fine. Basically, they were just chilling. I've had people come to my live classes to say, my boss sent me here. You know why? Because all my coworkers tell me I'm mad all the time. And it's simply not true. And I said, I think I know what it might be. So that's what a resting face is. You have no ill intention. You are just relaxed. But we have to know that that face is not inviting for communication, because you have this look on you. And tell me if that's ever happened to any of you guys, where somebody randomly comes over to you out of the blue, right? And says, hey, you okay? And you're like, why? Of course. That's it. You just have that face. So we have to kind of get familiar with that. So there's a great exercise I've learned on how to get familiar with your resting face. So you get in front of a mirror, and when you're in front of that mirror, you then close your eyes and take about 10 or 15 seconds to just relax your entire body. Just like like I said, find your Zen, right? And then once you're at that point where you're ready to like sit down, open your eyes real quick, and then tell me what you see. And what you're probably going to see is your resting face. And I think you may not like it. And the first question you ask yourself is going to be, boy, do people see that face when I'm going about my business? And the answer is yes, because we're not realizing when we're making that resting face, because it's not intentional. We're just sitting in our office, or we're just walking. Maybe we're concentrating on something. Maybe we're thinking of something. Maybe, we're just not thinking of anything. When you're reading a book, you probably have your resting face on. When you're sitting home watching TV, you probably have your resting face on. Now, in all those situations, doesn't matter if you're alone in your house and you're watching TV, but when you're out in public, that is sending a message out. And it's not the right message you want to send, right? Because you probably don't feel that way. So when you're doing that exercise, now do it a second time. You close your eyes, you relax, you get to that point. But before you open your eyes, you put a slight smile on your face. Not a big one, just a slight, what you feel is a slight smile. Then you open your eyes, what you're going to see is a more neutral face, probably one that you want to display over the resting face. But you're going to feel like you're like this, right? And I don't want to walk around like this, because that looks kind of weird, right? But I've come to learn that when I'm making that face, that's not what I'm displaying. Does that make sense? Internally, what you feel the face you're making is usually a level above what actually is displayed. And the only way you're going to discover this is by practicing in the mirror, because then you do it a third time and you put a little bigger smile on your face, and then you see what that looks like. We have to get familiar with the face that we want to make and what that actually feels like internally, because it's not the face we think we're making is not what shows. And we're all going to have different degrees of it, and we're all going to feel silly when we're standing in front of the mirror doing this exercise, especially if our family member sees us. It's like, what are you doing? But I've done it 1,000 times, and I've come to trust that what I'm feeling, even though I think I might be smiling, I'm just showing a good neutral face, which is what I want to show. So that is something you can do to help you get familiar with your facial expressions. Because think about it. When you're communicating with somebody, where are they looking 90% of the time? At your face. At your face. So imagine all the messages your face is putting out that may not match your intention. Okay? So again, face is part of body language. Right? So again, that's just Dr. Moravian's first V. The second one is your voice. How do you sound? What does your voice sound like? Did you ever wonder? We think we know. You know why? Because we hear ourselves internally. So we think that that's the way our voice sounds, but I'm here to tell you that it's not. Now, give me a thumbs up if any of you have ever got the opportunity to hear yourself on a recording and your first reaction is what? What? Yeah, right? Your first reaction is, do I really sound like that? You are like just perplexed at how you sound. And again, that's because what comes out is not what you hear internally. So we have to get familiar with that, because the only way we can improve the way we articulate, the only way we can improve if we use a filler word a lot, like I mean, right, all those are filler words. And I know we've all been exposed to it when we hear other people use them a lot, right? Now, would you say that's distracting when somebody says every other sentence? Or my problem used to be the word right. I would say the word right after and between every sentence. I once did a 5-minute presentation on video, and I said right 28 times. And the impact of getting me to improve that was hearing it. Once I heard it, That was the magic potion I needed. Oh, I said, that's crazy. So I was able to overcome it. So my advice to you about that is get somebody that you know and trust with your permission to record you when you are unaware of it. And I emphasize with your permission, right? Because we're getting into legal stuff. But if you can get somebody, because look, we all have a recorder on this thing. Everybody carries it around. So if you can get a coworker, family member, friend to record you when you're just generally in a conversation with somebody, and then like my call center training, you listen back to that recording, let me tell you, it's going to be eye-opening. And you're going to say the same thing. Do I really sound like that? And you have to know that you do. And if you don't like the way you articulate, if you have too many filler words, well, now is your chance to correct it. I know, as a trainer and a speaker, it was really important for me to do that, because there's nothing worse than having something that is distracting, that when you're listening to somebody, that takes you away from what message they want to put out there, right? So that is something we have to get used to, what we sound like. And then there are other factors with the voice, like your pace. When you talk too fast, what happens is you don't enunciate well. You don't articulate well. And what happens is when we're passionate about something and excited about something, when we want to tell everybody, well, now we're talking too fast. And sometimes we don't, the message is not clear. If you talk too slow and you take too much time to get to the point, what do most people do? What are their reactions? Right? When you're talking to somebody and they are taking forever to get to the point, isn't it? Don't you lose your patience? And now our mind starts to wander, and we start thinking about what text we got while the person was talking. That's not good. So pace and volume are things that are important. And then the other factor with the voice that I've learned is so vital but so subtle, and it's called inflection. Okay? Inflection is the emphasis you put on a word to make a point. So let's say you told me, hey, I'm going out with my friends tonight. And I say back to you, I thought we were going out to dinner tonight. Now you see the inflection I put on we, right? To make that point. I thought you and I thought we, and it's very effective. Inflection is very effective to get my message out. But let's take that same sentence and change the word I put emphasis on. Will that change the meaning of what I want to say? So I might say, I thought we were going out to dinner tonight. Didn't change the sentence. I just changed the word I put emphasis on. Totally different meaning. Now maybe you said to me, hey, what can I cook for dinner? And I say, I thought we were going out to dinner tonight. I can change it again, same sentence. I thought we were going out to dinner tonight. Totally different message. So the lesson here is be careful of the emphasis you put on a word. Make sure it matches what you're intending. I'll give you an example from my call center training, right? So you come into work one day and you try to log into your company, right? Like we do every day, and it doesn't work, right? You get an error code, password's not working. You say, oh, I got to call IT. I got to reset my password or whatever, right? So IT gets it, they fix it, and here's what they do. They call you up and they say, when you clicked on that icon, you got an error code because it was a bad link. Now, what did that sound like? When you clicked on that icon, you got an error code because it was a bad link. What does it sound like I just did?
Blame them.
I blame them, right? And I'm not blaming it. I'm just letting you know why you had the problem. But I put the emphasis on you, so that made the person think that I was blaming them. But if I subtly change it, when you clicked on that icon, you got an error code because it was a bad link. So now I transferred the blame to where it should have been, right? It was a bad link. That's why you got an error code. It's all fixed. Have a nice day. But the first time, like Jennifer said, it felt like you were being blamed. So that's how powerful yet subtle inflection is. The emphasis you put on a word, we have to be very careful. So that's the vocal part of the V. That's the second V, right? We talked about the body language, the visual, how you look, your face, and what signals you're sending out with your body, how you're dressed, things like that. The second V was voice, the pace, the volume, the inflection, and how you sound. We have to get used to that. Now, the third V is your word choice. Okay, not speaking. That's the origin. But what words are you choosing to display your message? And there's a lot of factors that come into play. And I learned this during my days of a police officer, because there's something called a trigger word or a trigger phrase that is perfectly okay, but to the person you're talking to, it's a trigger. It hits a nerve. Think about things that somebody can say to you that's going to make you angry. A certain word, a certain phrase, whether it's, it's political or whether it's a family matter, but it's something that if I know the person really well, I'm not going to bring that up. Because if I bring that up, I'll probably get them angry. So that's the description of a trigger word. So what words are you choosing to communicate? Are they emotionally charged words to that person? Are they generally known as an emotionally charged word? Like some of the things we're hearing now and what's going on in the streets and things like that. There's certain words that are, you're told not to use, right? Because you don't want to stir up anybody. You just want to communicate with them. So word choice is a big thing. Are you using street jargon? Like I tend to do a lot, right? In my New Yorkie, right? But is it appropriate all the time to use street jargon? Or is it appropriate? Will I connect with a person better if I use certain terminology, right? The call center folks, going back to that, their text, their computer text. Did you ever call a company for help with something and the person on the other line is using lingo that you don't understand? Especially in the computers, the technical geek is using all this terminology, and all you want to do is help them fix it. And they're telling you how it's done and what you did, and you're like, I have no idea what you're saying, right? The ability to change your terminology appropriate for the person you're talking to becomes a major part of communication. So that's the word part of it, right? Choosing the right words to use so that person understands what you're saying. That's the third V. And Dr. Morabian in the book talks about the 3 V's have to be aligned with each other, and they have to match your intention. Anything less creates miscommunications. Does that make sense? And my whole theme is self-awareness, and is trying to get people to be self-aware of this, of the fact that they know what messages you want to put out, but is that what people see and hear? Otherwise, you're not going to be successful in your communication. Because when I look at the definition of communication, it is the act of communicating, right? And you know the old saying that if a tree falls in a forest, but there's no one there to hear it, did it actually make a noise, right? So the sound waves that were created by the tree falling, if it's never received by anybody, is it actually a sound? Now, communication, I can apply the same thing. I can talk all day, right? But if there's nobody there to listen and understand what I'm saying, have I communicated? Has the act of communication been complete? And I say no. So when somebody says, what's the difference between effective and ineffective communication? It's that it hasn't been completed. I can talk, like I said, I'm the type of person that can talk all day, but if I'm not making sure that people understand me and have the opportunity to react, and it doesn't always have to be good, right? Going back to the body language, right? And the voice, there's no such thing as good and bad, right? Because we know that this is the classic bad body language, right? Never do this because it looks like you're rejecting, right? People say, don't fold your arms because you're going to give the wrong message. But what if that's the message I want to give? What if you say something to me that's offensive and I don't like it and I'm insulted by it, and I give you one of these and I give you one of these faces and my voice sounds sarcastic, and you get that message because you say to me, oh, you don't like what I said? Now, we stop right there. Have I successfully communicated? Yes or no? Now, I'm communicating, rejection and sarcasm, but am I successful? Because my goal was to get you to know that I didn't like what you said. So I stay away. I teach one class that's called, how to improve bad communication habits. And I don't like that word bad because sometimes that's what I'm intending. So it's not bad, it's successful. So I like to use effective and ineffective communication. If you're sending out the wrong signals, that's ineffective communicating. and people will have a different view of what message you put out there. So that's why those 3 V's have to match. And just because you think you're communicating, and I'm trying to think of a quote that's in my head, and I can't think of it. It's something about the irony of communication is thinking that it's already happened, or something like that, where most people think communication has happened and it hasn't, because you're not delivering your message, the way you want to do. Another big aspect of communicating, and a lot of us don't think it's a skill, and a lot of people don't put priority on it, and that's called listening. Listening is a skill. Listening is a skill that you can practice. Listening is a skill that you have to be aware of, and it's probably about 50% of good communication. We've heard the phrase, hearing and listening are 2 different things, right? I think anybody that's married or in a relationship probably has heard that. Hearing and listening are 2 different things, and I've been guilty of that myself. My wife will tell me something, and I'll even repeat it back to her, but that doesn't mean I was listening to it. That doesn't mean I thought about it and I reacted to it, nor do I remember it. So listening, and here's the deal with listening that ties right into self-awareness. I ask people sometimes, do you think you're a good listener? And a lot of times, very similar to when you said you were a good communicator, if you tell me you're a good listener, you know what I'm going to ask you? How do you know? How do you know that you're a good listener? Because who's the judge of listening skills? You? Or is it the people that are talking to you? They're the ones that need to feel that you're a good listener. So how does that happen? How do you know? I could be listening in my brain. I could really be listening to what you're saying. I like what you're saying. I'm interested in it. I want to hear more. But you think I'm not listening. Now, what reason could be that a person thinks that the person talking is not listening? Think about your own experience. You're talking to somebody and you get the feeling they're not listening. What is it that you saw? What gives you the idea that somebody wasn't listening?
Distraction.
Anybody? What kind of distraction? What does that look like?
Maybe lack of eye contact or doing something else.
Yeah, maybe or on this thing, right? Yeah, people that are trying to listen to you and they're doing this, right? It's rude, right? People that give no response. You're talking, you're telling a story, you're giving information, and the person's just okay. They're nodding you to death. They're not responding. They didn't ask a question. They didn't react. Nothing. They just sit there with the deer in the headlights, right? To me, I'm thinking, I don't know if they're listening or not. So these are the signs of a listener. And we have to make sure that not only are we listening in our head and actually interpreting what the person's saying, but we have to show them that we are listening. You've heard the term active listening. That's what it means. You actively display listening. And we talked about some of them. So there's the eye contact, right? And in a minute, I'm going to talk about eye contact because that's another thing that's misunderstood, making eye contact with someone. But you got eye contact. You're standing straight in front of the person. You're not doing something else like typing while they're talking. You're maybe nodding and saying things like, oh, that's interesting, or wow. Oh, when did that happen? It's just some sort of interaction based on what you're saying. Even if somebody said to me, you know what, Mike, I don't really understand what you're saying. To me, that means they're listening. And maybe it's my fault they don't understand. Maybe I have to change my message and the way I'm giving my message. But the fact is they're telling me they don't understand is their way of saying, I want to understand. Please explain it better. So to me, that person's really listening. But if somebody's just nodding me to death, and then later on, they're like, I don't even know what Mike was talking about. And sometimes people are shy to come up and say, hey, Mike, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you explain it better? Or maybe I'm not interested in what the person's saying. Do you ever talk to somebody and you could care less about what they're saying, but you still want to connect with them? You still want to be a good listener? Can you still do it? Can you be a good listener even though you have you could care less about what they're saying? And based on what I'm talking about right now is yes. If you display signs, you give them eye contact, you nod, you let them know. You could even say, I don't know anything about that, but you really like it, don't you? How long you been doing it? And I use my own example. I happen to be a Star Trek geek, right? Yeah, I go to conventions, the whole deal. So I could be talking to somebody about Star Trek and they could care less. They've never watched it. They think it's silly, sci-fi, it's fake. There are people with pointed ears, but that doesn't mean that they can't be interested in what I'm saying. And maybe the way I'm telling and how passionate I am about Star Trek, that's what engages them. And they look at me and they go, Mike, wow, I've never seen the show, but you seem to love it. How did you get into it? You know, and what is a convention like, right? So the person could care less and they're not going to like Star Trek anymore after they talk to me than they did before. But they gave me the courtesy of listening to me. And what listening is you're telling the person, I value what you're saying and I enjoy talking to you. Because, you know, it's the boomerang effect listening, right? What do I mean by the boomerang effect? When someone feels that what they're saying has been heard, carefully considered, and listened to, well, now that person's going to be more open to hearing what you have to say, even if you have the opposite point of view. So think about that in a situation where you have a difference of opinion with someone. And people always ask me, hey, Mike, how do you prevent a difference of opinion from becoming an argument and then becoming a conflict? Because that happens a lot. You know, you talk with somebody and you disagree and all of a sudden you're fighting. I said, listen, that's what I recommend. Because even though the person talking to you, you totally disagree with them, but you're listening to their point of view and you're asking them, well, why do you feel that way? You know, and you're asking questions about their opinion. Even though you don't agree with it, that sort of inserts a power into that conversation. Because that person now feels like that you actually listen to them. And now they're going to be more open to hearing your point of view. And the best part of that, instead of resolving where each person convinces the other to be right, what happens is you get to that agree to disagree. You ever hear that phrase? Right? Agree to disagree. Well, that is a very good zone to be in when you're communicating. Because what that says is that two people can have a difference of opinion, but it's okay. You mutually respect each other. I don't agree with you, but I understand where you're coming from. Okay, let's move on. Now your connection with them remains solid because you have that mutual respect. And it's a lot easier to get there. If you go into a difference of opinion with the goal of changing that person's mind, well, what you're going to be doing is you're going to start displaying communication habits that may not be conducive to getting to that agree to disagree, because you're out there trying to change their mind. And most of the time when you try to do that, you end up in an argument and you say things like, oh, you're so stubborn, or you don't have an open mind, instead of calm down, let me hear what you have to say, and then I'll tell you what I have to say. If I shoot for that, it's a lot easier to get there based on your communication skills. I want to agree to disagree with you, which means I want to understand what you're saying and hear you, and I want you to understand what I'm saying, and then let's move on. And what's good about it, too, is once you're in that zone, now it's easier to persuade somebody. Does that make sense? So now you have the opposite point of view and you want to persuade them your side. It's easier to do once you're in that agree to disagree zone. So that's important to know, not only during listening, but during talking as well. So that's how important listening skills are. If you show that and you put priority on letting the person know that you're listening just by your actions, just by your facial expressions, just by the questions you ask, they're more open to hear everything and you have a good, solid connection rather than them thinking that you're stubborn. Make sense? So I think people don't put as much priority on their listening skills as they do how they communicate. It's got to be, I know there's an old cliche about you're born with two ears and one mouth. So that stands to reason you should listen twice as much as you talk. I don't know if I agree with that totally, but I think you should shoot 50-50. I think in a conversation, you should be using your active listening skills as much as you're talking. So the messages going back and forth are even. It doesn't always work out that way, but the attempt needs to be made. So that's another part of communication. It's listening skills. I think it's really important to because the goal in life should be, when it comes to communication, is to make connections, right? You know, people use it like, I want to build rapport with somebody. I want to converse with them. You know, look at your work life, right? You're dealing with people over and over again every day, right? Think about that. Think about your work life. You're seeing people every day. You should be experts on how to communicate with every single one of your coworkers. Why do I say that? Because you see them every single day. You learn so much about them. You should be an expert on how to communicate with them. But yet I don't see that. I don't see that. How many times do we label people as difficult? Right? You ever label somebody as difficult to get along with? And you shouldn't really do that because they'll always have that label, and it makes it harder to connect with them. But if you just say, wow, there's lots of obstacles in the way of me communicating with this person. Let me see if I can overcome them. How can I make changes? Right? And I'm going to give you my Mikeism for the day. Okay. And here's my theory on communication. You should always use the AA approach to communicating. And what that means is every time you communicate, I don't care if you just say good morning to someone, you always assess and then adjust. That's my AA. Assess and adjust. So I'm talking to you, even if I'm saying good morning, you know what I'm thinking, you know what I'm assessing? What time of the day is it? What day of the week is it? What mood am I in? Who is the person I'm saying good morning to? How well do I know them? Can I say, yo, what's up? How's it going? Or is it my boss? I should say, good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Notice how the different way I say hello, depending on who it is, right? If it's your buddy, you're going to say hello differently than if it's the CEO of your company. I've assessed the situation. And now I'm making the adjustment of how I'm going to say good morning. And that's just a good morning. Imagine a whole conversation, how many times you're AAing. And when you get miscommunications, I find people don't AA. They're not assessing. You say things you shouldn't say. You put your foot in your mouth. You're inappropriate. You're not using any tact. And a lot of times it's because, you know what? I didn't assess the situation and then make an adjustment. So to me, always think that way. When you have a converse with someone, the AA approach, right? And another important part of communication, especially over the last 20 years. So there's lots of obstacles in our communication. And there's culture, right? There's job title, there's gender, there's political beliefs. All those are obstacles in communicating that we have to come over. We have to use our skills to overcome the adversities of what people believe. But there's one thing that is in our society now that makes it really tough to communicate. And that is generations, right? Because over the last 20, 25 years, we've now labeled every generation. We've put a label on them based on their years of birth and based on how they perceive the world. And the reason that that's happened is because the world has changed more often in the last 25, 30 years than it did back when I was a kid. When I was young, there were two generations, older people, younger people. That's it. That's all I knew about generations. And that's where the generation gap was created between parents and children, between adults and young people. And my father always taught me, respect adults, don't talk back to them. And that was the generation gap. Now, everybody's labeled, right? Because the world is changing so much, not only politically, not only, culturally, but technologically. I think that's the biggest factor because how many different communication channels do we have now? And I will admit that I've used the phrase, these kids today, right? When you start a phrase like that, and I'm a baby boomer, I'm 60 years old, and I've said that these kids today, they don't know anything about communication. Their heads are buried right here. They don't know what it's like, and we say all these things, but I do that no more. I've done the research. Tony Robbins, a famous motivational speaker. I'm sure you've all heard of Tony Robbins. He has a quote that says, in order to communicate with people, we must realize that everybody has a different way they perceive the world. And we have to use that understanding in order to communicate effectively with people. And it points right to the generations, right? Because we look at the younger generations today, number one, they are more savvy when it comes to technology. And I can attest to that. I was in IT in the 90s. I taught my son how to build his own computer when he was like 14 years old, and he still has it today. But when I need help with this, Where do I go? To my son, the millennial, right? And I've accepted that he is more savvy with this stuff than I am, and I was. This is new to me. I wasn't born into this. I'm still learning this, right? Again, I'm an old geezer in his eyes, and I don't like texting. And as soon as I say that, it's like, well, that's because you're old. No, you know why I don't like texting? Because I'm not good at it. I see the kids, and they're doing it with their thumbs, and they can write a novel in 10 minutes. And I'm pretty impressed with that, right? I'm like, wow, you write so fast and it's all correct. I can't do that. I'm still pecking, right? So I've accepted that. I'm okay to go to a millennial or a Gen Z and say, can you help me with this? I'm not sure how to do it. I know you're really good at it, right? And they'll probably roll their eyes. Like I say, I rolled my eyes at these kids today. Well, I'm sure these kids today are rolling their eyes at me, right? And they have to stop that also, right? Because we have to think about it. So let's say, and a factor too in generation is that people are living longer. Retirement age used to be 65. And by that time you're in an old folks home. And when I was a kid, that's what I thought. What makes me feel great today is I'm 60. But when I was a kid, what I thought about a 60-year-old, they're in an old folks home, retired, right? And makes me feel good that today I'm not that person, and that's because, we're living longer and we're healthier. So that makes me feel good. But how do the kids look at me now? I'm 60. And am I an old geezer that doesn't know anything about technology? Hey, if my point about living longer is that now there are 4 generations at work working together, right? You have kids fresh out of college, is in the work world, probably in the Gen Z or the post-millennial generation. How are they going to get along with me? This guy that's been around for 30 years, he's used to doing things his way. He's doing the same process for 30 years. But now this new Gen Z comes in and says, hey, I got a better way to do that. I'll save you half the time. What do we do most of the time? It's like, no thanks, kid. I was doing this process before you were born. Right? You ever hear jargon like that? Right? Instead of saying, wow, you can save me half the time, I'm all ears. Right? So that's kind of you're applying the AA 2 generations, right? If I want to go talk to a Gen Z and build a work relationship with them, how do I approach? What adjustments do I make? Do I go talk to them and say, hey, have you ever seen All in the Family? It was a great sitcom in the 70s. They're going to look at me with the crazy eyes and go, what's that? I never heard of that. Right? Why would I do that? Why would I approach somebody and talk about something that they're probably not going to understand? I would probably think of something, and one of these things, if I go approach a Gen Z with a question about this and say, I know you're really good at this. Can you show me how to do this? They're more likely going to go, oh, sure, I'll show you. Rather than if I walked over and said, your head's always buried in this thing. You can probably help me with Facebook. You see the difference of the attitude? I didn't have an open mind. I'm still critiquing you as I'm asking you for help rather than going, wow, you are really good at this. Can you show me how to do this on Facebook? See the difference as you approach somebody? The person's going to be more receptive to the old geezer coming up. And I keep saying that term because it's me, so I'm allowed. But, just the older generations have a different perception on life, and it's okay. When my son was in college, of course, I want to hear from him, right? Is he alive? Does he have a girlfriend? Is he doing good in school? And if I left him a voicemail, how fast is he getting back to me? Right? No. How should I communicate with my son if I want an instant response? What do you think?
Text message.
If I text him, he'll get back to me immediately. Now, it'll be one word, which is okay because I'll know he's alive. But the point is I came out of my comfort zone knowing that that's a better way to communicate with a millennial and not leave a voicemail. Now, my son should do the same thing. And he should say, well, my dad doesn't like to text that much. You know what? Let me take 10 minutes out of my life. Let me give him a call. Let me let him know what's going on. And this way I'll get him off my back. And he's right. And he chose to come out of his comfort zone because he knows that's my preferred communication channel based on my generation, based on what I was exposed to. So that's another big factor that's going to help us improve our communication. Is think about, the assessment part of my AA includes what generation they're from. And how do I craft my message to engage that particular person? And I know it's a lot of work, And I know there are people that I've spoken to that have said to me, you know what? I'm not changing myself. I treat everyone exactly the same. That's the way I communicate. And what I say to that person is, don't brag about that, because that's not an effective way to communicate. Because are all the people you're communicating with the same? Clearly not. They're not clones. Everybody's different, and they're from a different generation, and they have a different job title, and they're a different gender, and they're a different culture. So why would you communicate exactly the same to everybody? So we have to learn to be self-aware of what people see and hear when we communicate with them. Again, that includes our face, the sound of our voice, the words we use. What are people seeing and hearing? Because that's what they're basing their perception on whether we're good communicators. If we want people to look at us now, if you are looked at as a really good communicator, and I'm sure most of you are, doesn't that make it easier to connect? When the person already thinks of you as somebody they want to talk to, somebody that they're engaged by, somebody that they look at as very credible, it makes it so much easier to connect. Rather, the other side is the messages you're giving out is that you're arrogant, you think you're better than everybody, or that you're always mad all the time, or that you don't like your job. People don't want to come talk to you. They avoid it, right? They avoid it. They're just going to see that resting face and they're going, I'm not going to talk to them right now. So those are factors that affect. So that's the general theme: self-awareness and accountability. You better be accountable for the message that you've put out there. Because if you're wondering why somebody's reacting to you in a certain way, and instead of labeling them as difficult to get along with, or you wake up in the morning and go, now I got to go deal with these people. And it just means that there are obstacles in the way of you communicating with them, and we have to figure out how to overcome those obstacles. And all those factors may be brought in: generations, resting face, body language, all that stuff. So, I'm hoping that my message gets out there. And I call it the street corner approach, because I like to talk real. I like to make it like we're just hanging out on a street corner and talking about. I had some of the greatest conversations of my life when I was younger, sitting on what we called a stoop. And in Brooklyn, if you're from New York, you know what that means. It's like the front steps to your house. It's called a stoop. And my friends, in between playing ball and stuff, we would sit on the stoop and we would just have the greatest conversations, and it was just because it was just all unfiltered, right? And we were aware of our messages, and we were aware of face-to-face communication. So that's my general message: self-awareness and accountability about what people see and hear when they're communicating with you. So I'm open to any questions or any discussions.
Thank you so much. What a message there. I think that every one of us probably picked up on a little something that maybe we've gotten a little negligent with as far as the way we're communicating.
Yeah.
I get surprised sometimes when I listen to the replays of this meeting, plus other things I do, and I say, oh my gosh, that's not the way I meant that to go across.
Exactly. Yeah.
But probably the thing I was thinking about as far as difficulty in communicating, probably in my lifetime, right now, is probably one of the most difficult times that Americans are having communicating with one another. I have never seen us so divided politically and racially as we are now. Racially, it's better off than it was probably in the 60s, at the time that Martin Luther King in late 50s, when he was teaching how to peacefully protest.
Yep.
But unfortunately, we're not communicating, and I find it so frustrating in talking with someone with a different political view or a different view on race that they get angry.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, I'm planting the seed now. I've mentioned to some of you individually something that it just keeps coming up is, Glenn, you got to do this. It may not work, but it isn't going to hurt. So what I'm planning on doing, I don't know if I'll do it under the heading of Self-Improvement Meetup, but I'm going to have a, shall we say, a special edition of something that would be about noontime in the next probably a month or so from now, of which Mike has agreed to be a part of it. I'm going to have a panel on, and we're going to tackle some tough subjects. We can't communicate if we don't fully understand where someone else is coming from. For example, something no one wants to touch, but we hear about it. Black lives matter. Yes, they do. But all lives matter. But apparently to say that to some African Americans is almost like spitting in their face. And I don't totally comprehend that.
If I can comment on that, Glenn,
Yeah.
you don't mind? I think what it is that anytime you're talking about a subject, that you're passionate about, and even though what somebody says to me may be correct, like for instance, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter as well, and that may be true, but in that moment, what you're doing is you're taking away that attention. You're saying to that person, you're not so special because all lives matter. But when you think about what's been happening and what's come up to, and again, I don't want to get into this discussion, but it's just like telling that person that, hey, you're not so special. Don't think you're so special. And that's why you get that reaction. It's not that what you're saying is not true. It's just that for them internally, their perception is, well, now you don't want to concentrate on my problem. You're going to make it everybody's problem. So I think that's why. That's why. It's not that they don't agree with you that all lives matter. It's just that, we're focusing on what I said now. So I think that's what it is.
And likewise, they need to understand why other people don't understand why they feel the way they do. So let's open it up before Mike has to leave. He's got about another 5 minutes. We'll be going until 9:30, but he's got about another 5 minutes before he has to jump off. He's got 2 3-hour teaching sessions today, one this morning and one this afternoon, so he'll be worn out today. He'll be saying it's 5 o'clock somewhere real early in the day, if he can.
Hey,
who would like to maybe ask Mike a question or make a comment?
I've got one. Mike, what was the author of that book, Silent Messages?
Dr. Albert Mehrabian. If you just Google Mehrabian, it'll just be all communication, silent messages.
Yeah, I did a quick search on Amazon and several things came up, so I wanted to make sure I got the right one.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good read, and it's been around a while, and it's been updated, but it still holds true today. Still holds true.
I really enjoyed everything that you were talking about. I'm trying to become a better communicator in public and in private. So I had lots of good notes. So thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you.
And for those of you taking notes, as I did, if you want to supplement them, I will, hopefully by the end of the week, if not before, I'll have the replay of this posted in our Facebook group. And also I've created a YouTube channel, Chattanooga Self-Improvement Mastermind, I believe. It's one of my channels, so you'd have to look under Glenn Hodges. Jordan, would you and your lovely mom like to make a comment?
Yes, so thank you so much for that. I do have a question for you. It's Mike, right?
Yes.
So what kind of information do you have out there for future classes that you teach? Because I would love to attend some or read more information. How can I do that?
Well, I have a website. It's called the Street Corner Approach.
Streetcornerapproach.com?
Streetcornerapproach.com.
Okay.
I also am part of a speaker bureau called the motivationalspeakerbureau.com. And actually, Glenn mentioned Dr. Mel Campbell, who introduced me to Glenn. He runs that bureau. So you can get other speakers too. But for me personally, the Street Corner Approach, I talk about not only the classes that I train, but also the seminars that I speak at. Okay,
awesome. Good job. You did a great job communicating. I took like 4 pages of notes. So
just imagine if I can't communicate my communication speech, that would be bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And your name is Catherine, correct?
No, Christina.
Christina. All
yes,
right.
Sir.
I'm sorry.
And I'd like to say something. Yes. Mike, hi, my name's Jordan. Nice to meet you. I want to say one thing that I pulled away from this is I really want to start working more on my resting face, because I think the term RBF is something that a lot. When you talk about somebody coming up to you and saying, "Hey, are you all right?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm perfectly fine. What's wrong? Why did you ask that?" I'm like, "Well, you just have this look on your face." So I think that's something I'm definitely going to start practicing.
Yeah, that exercise is really good. Again, because I know that I feel like I'm smiling and I know I just have a neutral face on.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time to get used to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
We've got about 1 minute before Mike's got to jump off. Anyone want to jump in real quick?
Yeah. Hey, this is Bob.
Hey,
Mike. Hey, my wife keeps complaining that when I try to smile so I don't have a resting face, that I look like a politician. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, and that's the fake smile, right? Because a forced smile is a fake smile. So when you're doing that exercise, because remember I said you do it a second time, you close your eyes and you relax. That's when you put that smile on your face and then see what it looks like. So when you finally see in the mirror that authentic smile that you want people to see, you got to know what that feels like. Does that make sense? So that's how you get to it. But if somebody says, "Hey, will you just smile a little bit?" You end up showing that fake smile, and the quote is, "Don't smile, smile when you're happy, not just to make friends." There's a big difference there. So, and an authentic smile is like, "Hey, I'm glad to meet you." It's a smile. So practice in the mirror. That's what you need to do, Bob.
Thank you so much there, Bob. You're welcome to hang around as long as you can, but I understand if you do have to go, it's 9:20. Anyone else?
A couple minutes. Minutes. I want to hear.
We'll go to 9:30. Bob will jump off when he has to. Anyone else like to make a comment or ask a question?
I see Jennifer has her hand up.
Yes, Jennifer.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for the resting face, which is totally new to me. And, coming from a background of like teaching yoga and meditation, relaxation is a good thing. So I've got an awesome resting face. Like I'm really dialed into my resting face. But when I look at it, I'm like, wow, that does not look like a face that somebody wants to engage with. So right. Thank you. Yeah.
I appreciate
it.
And
I do have a question about this medium too, which is the thing that I struggle most with now that a lot of facilitation is online is, so now I'm going to look at the camera. So I'm looking at the camera, and my understanding is that from the other people's perspective, it's as though I'm looking into your eyes now. So it feels like a more connected communication experience. But it's awkward for me because I'd rather be looking at you. So now I'm looking at your faces. I have gallery view on and I'm scanning and looking at all your faces. So I don't know what to do about that.
And that is something that's been in my head. And I'm developing a class about about webinars, a class on how to participate in webinars without being awkward, because we're all showing our resting face while you guys were listening to me. A lot of you had your resting faces on, which of course I understand. But what else are you going to do? You could, like I said, you could paint a smile into the camera because you're on. And it's different because when I do my classes, I don't see the students; they only see me. So it makes it easier for them. And that's just with the seminar company that I do classes for. But yes, and that's something too. Eye contact is something I never really got to. When you stare into that camera, right, and you're making really good eye contact, how long before that becomes uncomfortable when somebody's looking into your eyes, right? Think about that. Somebody's looking right into your eyes. Like, look at me right now, right? And I'm looking right at you. How long before this becomes uncomfortable? It already is, right? It's like 5 seconds. So that's not what eye contact is. And eye contact is also not looking away and looking around because now the person thinks you're not interested. I've come up with this 5-second burst eye contact. That's what I do. I give somebody a 5-second burst, right? And, maybe nodding. And then I'll look away for a second. I'll look down, but I go right back. Another 5-second burst. And, and even when you're talking, you should be doing this, right? 5-second bursts, look away for a second, but go back. And that's good eye contact. If you stare, you're going to make somebody be uncomfortable. And if you don't look into their eyes, they're going to think you're not interested. So it was a great question because as we look at ourselves in the camera, like I've been doing for the last hour, is I want to look at you. Right now I'm looking at you, Jennifer. right? Because that's where your box is. But to everyone else, I'm looking, what is he looking at, right? Unless I stare into the camera, but I want to see your face also. So I have that same problem. So it's about how do we participate in these webinars and not look like we don't like what we're hearing, things like that. So,
You know, but
Thank you.
that
Thank you.
eye contact coupled with silence can be an excellent communications tool if you're asking a question, especially if it's a difficult question. Because when the silence begins, people begin to, oh my gosh, I got to respond.
Yeah.
You know, he's looking right at me. Ask me a question.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that's probably something as a former police officer you used maybe quite often.
Or not, because sometimes staring into somebody's eyes is not recommended during that situation. Sometimes it's a cultural thing. Sometimes it's you have somebody that maybe, you know, has mentally challenged and, you know, and they're acting out and, you know, staring at them may not be the recommended thing to do. It may be certain voice that you use talking, and sometimes we'll speak to the family. It's like, well, how do we communicate with them? What's the best way? And of course, a family member would know, and staring might be the worst thing you can do to somebody. So yeah, it's all in the different situations.
You know, you mentioned the word perception a while ago, and I've been doing a lot of studying on perception, and I was thinking about perception and communications, and with the one word, socialism. And to me, it's very clear cut what it is, but unfortunately for our younger generation, they think it's just sharing in love and peace. They don't know about Nazi Germany. They don't know about Adolf Hitler. I had a lady last fall on Leona Brown who escaped Nazi Germany as a child. She personally met Adolf Hitler. She remembered when her parents were so excited about what Hitler was going to do, but it wasn't long before they realized, oh my goodness, that's just propaganda. He's not going to do that. And she said, the little community she lived in is now part of Poland, but her family, and a few other neighbors that gathered with her family, they strategized and prayed, are the only ones that got out. The others in that little community were either killed or starved to death. So it's a pretty amazing story. I think I'd like to have her back again. So that gives you a whole new perspective on what socialism is.
Right. And back on what you said, Glenn, we can't expect young people to know about that, because unless somebody told them and they've heard stories. So sometimes older generations will react to the fact that the younger generations aren't sensitive to it. And it's very hard for them to be sensitive to it because they don't know anything about it. You know, the generations coming up now, right? They're in high school. They're going to be in college soon. 9/11 is going to be just like, well, what was that? You know, and unless they hear the stories and they speak to people that lost people, they're really not going to understand it. Even though, how can you not know what 9/11 is? Most generations today, right? But the newer generations, we're going to have to, you know, be patient with them because they don't know what it's like to lose somebody in a situation like that. So it's all the perception, it's all the reactions. So, yeah.
Jordan, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you're probably the youngest one in the group today. Did you go to parochial school or public?
Well, I had a mix of education. I started in homeschool for the first 7 years, and then I went to public school for 8th grade, and I was in private school for my high school. And
did you learn about history? Think some of the things that I was talking about earlier, in that it appears from what I can learn as far as what's going on now in the public schools, they're not teaching all of history. They don't know anything about socialism. They don't know anything about World War I, World War II, Korea, the Vietnam War, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, so
homeless veterans.
We obviously covered World War II. I remember talking about World War II. but because of the expanse of history and how much they try to, contain and go over, it's very difficult. And especially given the fact that when you're young, you're not really trying necessarily to pay attention all the time. You have to. It is hard to remember everything that they say. I mean, I've definitely in the last few years become a lot more interested. I've been learning a lot of World War II history on my own time, and I find it really fascinating. And I understand what you're saying about when you say that for a lot of younger people, they just view this term socialism as what's defined to them as peace, love, and just a happy community, and everybody shares everything. But when you really look into what socialism is as an ideology and what it looks like practically and the reality of it, yes, I have to agree with you that it's not all those things that people think it is.
And I have to log off, guys. So
All right,
thank
take
you
care.
so
Thank you
much.
so much,
Great
Mike.
to
We
meet you. I'm
I'm
appreciate
definitely
it.
going to be on future meetings. I love this forum, so thank you.
Thank you so much. We normally have a much larger crowd, but I think schools
okay.
are about to start, and that's probably what has entered into it, people getting in last-minute vacations. Thank you so much. And, folks, remember, we've got some great programs, additional great programs coming up. We've got on August the 18th, Dean Phillips will be speaking on Communicate to Succeed. He's also a good authority on communications. And then we've got on September the 1st, Dr. Ming Wong, who came here as an immigrant from China, and he has a degree in an MD degree from Harvard and a PhD in laser physics from MIT. He had $50 in his pocket when he came to the U.S., and he's a renowned surgeon that does a lot of philanthropy and has done many, many things to help the U.S. culturally. And then we've got another great speaker, and thank you, Bob Ritchie, for lining these up. We've got Dean Wagner that will be speaking on September the 15th, The Authentically American Story. He has kind of an apparel and I reckon promotional items company in which all of the products are made in America, some in Nashville. I think he's in maybe 15 or 20 different states that some of his products are made. It's 9:31, folks. I apologize. We ran over. It's a pleasure having each and every one of you there. If you're Jennifer, I put you in the group. If you're listed as Jennifer B on Meetup, I just added you to the group. And Catherine, I'll be glad to add you to the group. If you'll go into Chattanooga Self-Improvement Meetup, we'll add you. That way you'll get our emails and notices. It's been a pleasure. I love each and every one of you. I believe in you. And remember, your day will be just as good as you visualize.